Joining us for an update on the crisis in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria devastated the island is Angelo Falcón, president and co-founder of the National Institute for Latino Policy. And as we've been doing so many days during the news here with Richard or with Shamita Basu, we're going to bring you an extended update on Puerto Rico. Hi, Angelo. Welcome back to WNYC.
Good morning.
Hey, Angelo, we learned yesterday that the 10-day waiver on the Jones Act would not be renewed after it expired. This expired on Sunday. The waiver meant that foreign-owned ships could, deliver supplies to the island. Do you know if there are any plans to reinstate that waiver and, if it actually helped get supplies to the island faster?
Well, it's what the president did, and only giving a 10-day waiver, which expired, as you mentioned, was unreasonable. It just made no sense compared to what was happening in, Florida and Texas. They gave it a much longer time. So what this shows is just how, it's kind of being used as second-class citizens in terms of Puerto Ricans. And right now there are efforts. We have 5 members of Congress that are Puerto Rican. They're working hard to try to get an extension. Nidia Velázquez and the other Congress people that are Puerto Rican descent have been pushing to get a longer extension for a year. And there's even been a movement to in fact, talk about getting rid of the Jones Act in its entirety. So it's something that hasn't been resolved yet, but there are people certainly pushing to make sure that that waiver is at least extended for a year.
I'm curious about resistance.
I was just going to say that the problem is that the waiver is not, the waiver. It's almost like the way it was done. It was like just to deal with the immediate problems. The thing is that Puerto Rico is going to have to be rebuilding its economy, and that's going to be an important part of the process of waiving the Jones Act, because it just increases the cost of doing business in Puerto Rico, and right now it makes absolutely no sense.
I saw the Puerto Rico Governor Ricardo Rosselló wrote a letter to Congress yesterday saying Puerto Rico is still having trouble meeting basic needs and that it's about to reach a, quote, liquidity crisis. But after the storm in the early days, he didn't seem to want to criticize the White House or the federal response directly, and the White House claimed it was following the governor's lead on disaster response. So what's going on here politically, and how is it affecting people actually getting basics like food, water, gas, and other supplies?
Well, the problem is that at the very beginning of this process, obviously the governor's main objective was to try to get as much federal government support as possible and to play nice, obviously, with the president on this. But as time goes on, we begin to see that there was a long delay in getting FEMA out there, getting the kind of resources. To this day, there are complaints that people are just not getting basic needs met in terms of food, water. Puerto Rico, the electric grid is down. Most people don't have electricity. People are having trouble getting food, water. And the president, unfortunately, is kind of presenting this as they've been doing a great job in Puerto Rico. And then at one point, after he got criticized, he started saying, well, I'm just following the governor's orders. Now, we know the president here. He doesn't follow anybody's orders, in terms of anything. So it's this kind of political game that's taking place. And then you have the Congress, which is sitting on its hands here. You have this major humanitarian crisis occurring in Puerto Rico, and you don't see very much action on the part of the Congress to do anything. There's a big push to try to get an economic kind of recovery package together that people are assuming is going to be upwards of have to be something like $70 billion or more. But the inaction on the part of the federal government in terms of what's happening in Puerto Rico is it's really it really says a lot in terms of, again, the second-class citizenship that Puerto Ricans feel that we have.
Angelo, we did have a group of bipartisan lawmakers going down to Puerto Rico last weekend. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, she was among them, and she came back calling for this Marshall-like plan. Of course, the Marshall Plan were the recovery in Europe after World War II. What would this consist of for Puerto Rico?
Well, I mean, first of all, the idea of the recognition that there's a need for that kind of major investment on the part of the United States in terms of rebuilding of Puerto Rico is something that really hasn't been discussed in any serious way by any lawmakers or the White House. The impression you get is that, maybe we'll have a couple of little programs here and there. We may even forgive the debt. You know, Puerto Rico has over $72 billion in debt that they have to deal with. The enormity of the problem facing Puerto Rico somehow isn't getting through to the people that are making decisions about what the Congress and what the White House needs to do here. The fact is that when Gillibrand came up with, the notion of a Marshall Plan, I think right now the idea is that having that reality set in, that it's going to take a major, major, major investment by the government of the United States to get Puerto Rico to rebuild. It's not going to be little programs. It's not going to be tax incentives. It's got to be kind of a direct thing at the level at which they spent all this money, billions of dollars, in helping Europe rebound after World War II. Here, the difference is we're talking about U.S. citizens and the need to make a similar type of commitment.
Last question for today, Angelo. In the stories of people migrating from Puerto Rico to the mainland after the storm, there's talk of colleges and universities here enrolling Puerto Rican students and finding extra seats for them. But I understand some people, and I think you've written about this, are worried that a plan like that, which may have good intentions, could backfire and wind up harming Puerto Rico even more?
Yeah, well, I mean, the dilemma we're in right now is we're in a situation where I don't think anybody knows exactly what's going to happen. Right now, there's been a response, I think, by many of the states to try to be helpful in a direct kind of way. The problem is that we're talking about the current situation. When you start thinking about the future of rebuilding that Puerto Rico is going to have to undergo almost from scratch, then you begin to see the complications of having too many people from Puerto Rico leaving, especially people of working age population, younger people, in a profound kind of way. Because, I mean, we're talking about, let's say, 10, 20% of the current Puerto Rican population leaving. This is on top of similar numbers having left already because of the debt crisis. This kind of depopulation has all sorts of implications for the future of Puerto Rico in terms of its institutions, in terms of what you have to build on, to rebuild on, if most of your population is left. This is unprecedented in the history of the United States, this kind of situation where part of its population is totally being depopulated. We don't know the consequences. We don't know how you rebuild back from something like this. There are a lot of unknowns that we, as we go into the future of this thing. And then what we see on the part of the federal government is a real lack of commitment to jump in there and really, really deal with this head on.
Angelo Falcón, president and co-founder of the National Institute for Latino Policy. Thank you as always.
Oh, thank you.
And Richard, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
The Brian Lehrer Show continues.